Alright, so if you guys saw my last video, I basically showed you some of my homemade guns, and I had some comments asking, and I plan on making some videos anyways, on some of the trigger designs. So I had some comments asking for more details on the linkages inside these guns, what makes them work, and so that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video today. You can see here I've kind of drawn them out, and I'm also going to be taking some of these guns apart and showing you what's going on inside of there, how they work. And so let's get into it. So first thing off, I'm going to start with this trigger. I have it marked number 1. I have these marked in like levels of difficulty, and not really difficulty to get working, but time it takes to get them to just make all the parts that you need and everything. And all these are fairly simple, they're not super hard. Some of them take a little, they all take a little bit of a messing with things, especially springs, to get everything to work together correctly, but it's really not too hard. And so first off, we're going to start with this one. This is the first one I recommend if you're going to build a homemade gun. This design here is fairly simple, and this is the first one I started off. This was the first homemade gun I ever built, and so I didn't really struggle too much getting this to work. But I'll show you on this gun I changed some things for this, which is how I have it drawn out here, and I'll show you why I changed over to this in a second. So first we'll take apart this one. It's the first one I ever built, and to really see better what's going on, I'll take off this handle scale real quick. It's just one bolt that holds on these two pieces of sheet metal. Let's take it off of there. Okay, so now you can see inside the frame there. But so basically how this one works, and as I have drawn out on that piece of paper there, it's a two-piece trigger system. So this here is your trigger. Here's your trigger piece, and then here's your hammer. And where these holes are the pivot points. So basically right here is where you'd pull the trigger. So that's like, you know, your trigger on this gun. And then when you pull that, obviously if it pivots right here, this part's going to go forward, and that's kind of like your sear on your hammer. When you pull this forward, this spring that's pulling this way is going to drop your hammer, and it's really that simple. It's not too hard to explain. It's going to pivot here, obviously, and that's how this gun works. So if you can see in here on this gun here, I didn't use the spring on that like this to pull the hammer forward. On this one I did. On this one I used kind of what your revolver has. So there's a piece of spring steel, you can see it goes down and then comes in. I have it bolted here, and basically there's a notch. There'd be a notch right here on the hammer, so basically it would be like that. That's notched out, and then I have that piece of spring steel that comes down, and that's pushing up on that. So instead of using this spring here, I have this that goes down into the handle for the grip, and that's what's pushing this up. So when I pull the hammer back, you can also see them underneath. Right there is where that cut is. That's right there that I'm talking about, where your hammer engages. So if you watch real closely in here, you can see, so I pull the hammer back, there it locks in. You can see that locks in. There's the hammer, and there's that spring that's pushing up on the back. Here you can see it, and when I pull the trigger, bang. So you can actually see the piece of spring steel move down here when I push the hammer down. Oh, got it stuck. So you can see that piece of spring steel move down there. And yeah, so that's a fairly easy one. Pretty easy to understand. This one here, this is the 9mm, and basically how it works, I'll pop up in the barrel. You can see there's that spring that's in this picture here that's pulling it. So same kind of sear. You can see the cut down there, the bottom that catches on this trigger. You can see when I pull back on the hammer, you can see it locks in there, and it's pulling back on that spring. So see, when I pull back on the hammer, it's pulling on that spring. There's where the spring attaches underneath. Bang. Show you that where it locks up one more time. I gotta pull this trigger forward because I don't have a return spring on it. You can see right there, those two sears meet up, boom, locked in, fired. These are actually very, like, you can hammer all over this gun and it ain't gonna go off until you actually pull the trigger. So I mean, that's a pretty easy trigger design to make work. Doesn't take a whole lot of time. You just got to figure out where your holes are going to be for your screws and all that, and so it's not too difficult to make that trigger. So that's how that kind works. Then I've got all these guns ready to take apart, so I'll show you that design. Here's probably the second easiest one, and all these trigger designs, they vary on how you need to design your trigger on what kind of operating system. So on this operating system, I have basically, let me take the lower. I have those pins ready to pop out. I took the nuts off them already. So this gun uses an upper and a lower system. So there's that. Here's the lower. And how this one works is, again, here's one of your trigger piece. There's a pivot, so we're gonna have a pin going through there, and then here is your basically sear bar. And what's going on this one is basically when you pull the trigger back, it pivots here, so it's gonna send this part here up. This is a very light spring right here. You can see it in this side of this gun. It's kind of hard to see inside there. See, there's a spring. And basically that right there is your spring that's holding this down. So see your sear here? It's on that spring. And so basically that very light spring just to keep this up and making contact with this front part of the trigger. The back, when you pull the trigger, is going to push this up on that very light spring, which is going to, in turn, it's going to pivot here on this pin, and it's going to drop down the sear. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see a little better. It's going to drop down the sear. Again, here's a spring right here. This is like inside the bolt. You can see that's their spring back there. And that sear catches right on that block right there. When that sear drops down, this spring is going to push it forward, and then your round's going to be like right here, obviously, in your barrel. And then boom. That one's not too complicated either. So you can see here when I pull the trigger, this sear here is going to drop down. You can see. And how that works, right here is the back part of the trigger. When I pull this, it's going to push up on that linkage. And this spring here is just very lightly, it needs to be a very light spring. It doesn't need to be very stiff. The one that you have here needs to be pretty stiff. It has to be strong enough to go forward with enough force to set off the round. But you can see, here's a look from the bottom. You can see that sear drops down. And so let me put the gun back together just to show you show it actually working. Let me get some of these pins put back in here. This one's a little bit difficult to get. All right, there we go. All right, and so basically catches, and you can see down in there, you can see that sear catching on that other sear. And so when I pull the trigger, drops that down, see it dropping down, bang. Show you guys that again one more time. I think you can see it pretty good. So there's that sear catching on the other sear with the springs behind it. When I pull the trigger, watch it drop down, bang. So not too hard of a trigger design. It does take some time to get it working with, all these guns. It just to get everything working right, it just takes time, but it's not really too hard to get this trigger working. You just gotta, on all these trigger designs, you've got to design your trigger around what your gun is going to be doing. So on the next one here, I need the striker to be dropped from farther up forward. This is actually behind the trigger. So that's just use your trigger design on what kind of design your gun, and it obviously depends on what kind of action you're going to have. This action here is better on this like bolt action kind of deal I got going on, and also on a semi-auto this would probably be better, an open bolt design. This one here is the one I'm going to talk about next, and that is this. So you can see there's a lot more pivot points on this one. Let me zoom it back in, you guys can see. So there's a lot more pivot points on this trigger, and how this one works is, here's your trigger piece again, and in this one you're going to have a pivot up here too, and this right here is going to be your link to go to your sear. And so when you pull your trigger, it's going to pivot here, it's going to push this link forward, which is going to push this piece here forward, which is going to pivot here on this sear piece, and it's going to drop the sear down, and then exactly like how this one worked, you have a stiff spring back here, and that's going to go forward and hit your rounds. This is like your firing pin in there, and that's all that spring and everything is going on inside this small bolt here. This is another 22. This is a 22 bolt action. So let me first show you it working while it's together. So basically you can see up underneath, if you look, there's what I'm talking about. Here's your trigger piece, and there's where I have a roll pin going through. So a very small roll pin. I mean, you can see in relation to my fingers how small this is. So then there's your link, runs up. There's your next roll pin on your sear piece, and basically that sear piece is going to catch. There's your sear down there. It's going to catch. Put the bolt forward, it's going to it's catching on there right inside. Use a screwdriver to point in there. Right there is your sear on your firing pin. You can see these springs here are depressed. So if I pull this trigger now, it's going to drop that sear on your firing pin. Boom. And so put it back, close the bolt again. You can see, pull the trigger, you can see when I pull the trigger, it is pushing this forward. Let me show you guys once more so you can see. See, it's pushing that linkage forward. Drops us here. Let me take this apart. This gun also uses like an upper and a lower, basically. So right here is your upper. There's that little tiny, that's like you're connected to your firing pin back here with these springs inside your bolt. And here, right here is the trigger mechanism. You can see from the top better. So you can see there's your trigger. When the trigger gets pulled, it drops that sear down. So, you got to be pretty good with your tolerances. I mean, you can see my tolerances aren't great on this linkage, but you're basically stacking quite a few tolerances. You can see if I'm holding this trigger firm here, you can see my tolerances aren't amazing because I can wiggle the sear around quite a bit, but it all stiffens up when you have your spring tension on from your firing pin. So, but you can see this is a pretty, again, not a terrible, it takes a little bit more design because it uses 3 pieces. The other ones are just 2 pieces to the actual trigger linkage group itself, but on this one it uses 3. So you have your trigger piece, your link, which is basically just a piece of like sheet metal I used, and then your sear piece. So more holes to be drilled, more welding to be done. And on these triggers, what I have here is, on this trigger I always usually have like a piece of flat stock that I bend with a slight, trigger shape. This one isn't bent much, but you can see it's bent a little bit there. I have a piece of bent flat stock that's made, and then I have a piece of round stock with a hole drilled through it. That's the diameter of my frame. You can see that's like a piece of round stock there. And I grind a flat edge so I can TIG weld it onto this piece. So there's gonna be like welds like there and there holding this on to obviously welding that onto your piece of flat stock, which is going to be your basically trigger part that your finger actually makes contact with. And that's where it makes a good spot to drill your hole. If you're using thick enough flat stock like this here on this trigger, almost thick enough where I could drill a small little hole, but I like to use these bigger bolts. They're just so it's stronger. And so you gotta have a piece of material obviously big enough to support a hole being drilled through it, and so obviously to mount it to your frame. These ones are like sheet metal. But so yeah, it just kind of, your gun design, it kind of has to be designed around your trigger. How big your frame is definitely depends on how big your trigger is. So like on this one, you have to have it big enough forward, which is easy enough to do on this one because you got to have something to support the barrel anyways. To come out here to hook on the front of the frame is where I have this spring. So there's a lot of different trigger designs. I showed you 3 here. These are the only 3 I've used so far. I've used this design that I have on this. So the first design, I've used it like 3 times on 3 different guns. And then I've used this one once on this gun, this one, and then I've used this one on this gun. And so I'd use any of these trigger designs. Again, they're all good for different things. If you need to push it super far forward, you can really make this link here as long as you want. So if you need, for some reason, if you need to drop your sear way up here, you can make that link as long as you want, basically. And then like on this one here, you can push this pretty far back. There is, I mean, technically this design, if executed properly, you could almost get enough length out of it to use on a bullpup, but you just have to design the frame of it a little bit differently. But so hopefully this video helped you guys out. Hopefully the people that have commented that they want to see more details, hopefully this gives you a little bit more details. I think I kind of went over how they worked. If you want to see even more details on like just one gun, I can give, I mean, I don't know what else I'm going to really say other than this video. I can basically talk about other things other than the trigger linkages, but as far as triggers go, hopefully this video kind of covered all these ones that I showed in the first video there, and hopefully that helps you guys out. I know you guys said you wanted to see more, and so I'm glad to show what I've done to make these guns work. And then yeah, I'll talk about more bolt design if you guys are interested in that, or like barrels. I want to make some more videos on rifling barrels and other things. I want to also make a video on making springs. When I was making these guns, I wasn't quite making my own springs yet, but now, other than this one here that I actually cut this piece out of a leaf spring that works there. But anyways, hopefully that answered some of your questions on the trigger design, and hopefully if you're gonna build your own, hopefully this inspires you. This kind of takes some guesswork out of some of these trigger designs. Yeah, they're not really that hard, especially this one. If you're gonna build your first gun, especially if it's a handgun or even a rifle, you can use this design. This number 1 here, this is super simple. Basically, I don't think I mentioned what this one was for because I don't have it on either one of these guns. But this can be a very light spring where if it's hooked onto your frame up here, you can basically have a pot in your frame that pushes this really light spring forward to reset your sear here on your hammer. But I think I basically covered everything else. If you guys want to see any more, like I said, drop a comment, and I'll try to get back to those when I can. But for now, that's all I have to share today, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one.